And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy.
I don't want you to protest, I don't want you to riot, I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being, God damn it! My life has value!
We get together, have a few laughs.
Welcome to Iowa Talk, guys. I am your host, Teepee.
And I'm your host, Theo.
And we're back with our special Anarcho-Capitalist friend, special guest, Choun.
For part 2 of an interview here.
Yeah.
Say hi, Choun.
Happy to be back.
All right. Great to have you back, buddy. All right. So we ended the show, the last one, with a question that was leading off of, we had gotten into what prevents crime from happening to individuals who can't provide private protection, right? And then, form maybe community militias and stuff like that. And then we would mention private security firms taking over, obviously, for police protection. Communities would have to, or individuals would have to pay for their own protection. But one question I had is, what happens when a private security company gets too big? Like, has that scenario ever came up in any anarcho-capitalist discussions that you know of, or have you ever thought about that yourself?
Well, I don't know why that would be any different than like any normal firm. Well, obviously the ramifications might be a bit differently, obviously, because they would have some kind of weaponry or some kind of ability to be coercive if they wanted. But I think the way that the market operates in other industries, it would be similar in that there would be an opportunity there for mergers, there would be an opportunity there for new entrants into the market, perhaps some kinds of partnerships, all kinds of different things. For example, right now, pharmaceutical companies, car companies, all kinds of different companies, they form, even competitors, they form, special partnerships to develop certain products or to try to disrupt the marketplace, maybe against the larger competitor. I mean, for example, even going back to like the Mitsubishi Eclipse, right? And like that and the Dodge Shadow back in the day, that was a partnership between Mitsubishi and Dodge to create a car, and they both got one out of it, right? So, if they can do that, there's no reason why two competing, or at least, two defense contractors or security firms within a marketplace couldn't band together to try to defend them, to defend their interests against another. Now,
they do it all the time, like on the F-35 project. That was even, there were multiple companies that came together on that.
They all bid.
Yeah. Yep. And worked together, in fact.
Correct.
Yeah, so even now, if we think about today in police forces, there's enough instances out there where federal or local law enforcement work together in missing persons cases and all kinds of other things. So there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
In a private system.
Well, that's a good point. I was just thinking, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, Kevin Spacey taking over, his private.
It'd be kind of cool. It would be cool.
That'd be terrible.
Oh, yeah, no, terrible. You're right. Not cool. Terrible.
Yeah, not terrible. Yeah.
If my mind serves me correctly, the FBI was predated by the Pinkertons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they were a private investigation.
Yes.
Firm that
down.
They were incredibly efficient at going, across the West or what have you, anywhere, really, and finding people.
Yeah, and depending on your perspectives, I think that there's mixed reviews on the Pinkertons, but I would say also part of that comes with the special privilege they had as being a government contracted firm to kind of, as an extension of their arm. It's similar to, how places like Blackwater or whatever mercenary group you want to pick are similar today, where, to diffuse responsibility in the Middle East, the government instead sends private contractors out there because then they can disown them when they do something wrong. So the Pinkertons in that same case are given special power to go and to and to act as an agent of the state. Yet they're still a private firm, right? It's kind of this perverse incentive there. I think that wouldn't exist necessarily in a non-state society.
There could be a perverse incentive, with companies like Blackwater and whatnot too, but I'm sure that we'll never see the details of those contracts.
A lot of people made some money on that.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. So, moving on with this, unless you got anything else to say about that.
No, I think
yeah. All right. So earlier you'd mentioned, adults. Even now, like, we are the owners of our own body, right? We are the masters of our own domain, of our own bodies. Nobody has the right to tell us what we can and can't do with our own bodies and what we can and can't put into it and this and that, right? That's our liberties, our God-given liberties as being born, right? But you had also mentioned when it comes to children, there's obviously a line there where children can't make decisions for themselves. That's why they need adults and guardians, right? Parents and guardians. So what would the age of consent laws work? How would those work in an Ancap society?
I think that's a great question. I mean, it's kind of one of these things where it's almost a matter of perspective in that when do you consider a child an adult, right? I think we've operated for so long under the idea that they're an adult at 18. So I'd expect that it would be similar today, tomorrow. If tomorrow became Ancapistan, I would say the majority of Ancapistan, or at least the majority of whatever this geographical region, which we would consider this non-country, right? That's kind of weird to talk about, but I would assume that it would be 18. Like, just because that's what's in the cult, it would be totally cultural.
It would be cultural.
Well, it still is.
Yeah, well,
globally.
Exactly. It all depends on the culture and stuff.
There are plenty of places, folks, where 15-year-old girls are well beyond marriage age.
Very true. Yeah. And I think also, since we've kind of diffused, I guess, the responsibility of the child in life, right? Or at least like what we would consider a standard adult responsibility, we continue to push that further and further into older age, right? What I'm saying is, an 18-year-old today is expected to do much less than an 18-year-old 50 years ago was.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
So I think, like, if we were having this conversation in the early 1900s, then probably it would be a different answer. Maybe it would be 15, because 15-year-olds were expected to do more adult things back then, and
and their
not to be crude,
their life expectancy was way less.
Exactly. Yeah, and not to be crude, like they were having kids earlier and things like that. Now, when we look back, we think how gross that is. But if we kind of transport ourselves back into the 19th century or something, it makes complete sense, because
Grandpa dies at 40 years old.
Yeah, dies of TB at 22, you know what I mean, or something like that, or
exactly.
So I think that it would change with the culture, and I would hope to see it at 18, because that just makes sense to me. But I don't know.
It would, I guess, depend on the community.
For sure, it would depend on the community. Depend on what the expectation of that individual would be based on their age, like what kind of responsibilities they're expected to. I mean, because who knows? We go back in 100 years, and if the state goes away and people take more charge of their lives, perhaps a 16-year-old will be more ready to do something, and they'll be considered older. It's kind of gross, honestly, to think about it a little bit, right? Because then as I'm saying that means then, okay, then if you're 16, then maybe in 100 years, it's not bad for a 30-year-old to date it. But right now, we're thinking that's disgusting, and those people should get the wood chipper. But I think,
obviously, pedophiles should get the wood chipper. But in our society, if it was in a situation where life was that rough, where your life expectancy was low, obviously, things would change. Human nature is to survive, right, and adapt. Yeah. We're the most adaptable creatures on the planet.
To put it in perspective, there's a farm that was a homestead, one of the early homesteads in our county. One round trip plowing your one row with the hull behind plow,
the original John Deere,
with some oxen, was a 14-mile round trip. Whew.
Yikes.
That's real hard work. So
now you got 80 rows.
Like you said, the expectations were just completely different.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also say that our world today is a lot more complex than it was back then. It's not saying that our lives are easier or harder, but they're different in complexity, and I would argue that, just
our
the fact that we are more, for sure. But they bring upon itself different challenges. I would say more complex challenges that takes some higher thought processes. And that's not to say that, obviously there's a lot of really dumb people around here. You go on Twitter for 10 minutes and you see it, but I think that it's more difficult to navigate the world today, and just from a complexity standpoint. For sure, physically, it's easier to live today.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I'd say that we're under different pressures. But.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah. By a very wide margin, different pressures, and it's easier. I want to change up the question subject a little bit here. If we may.
I think you answered that pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great.
Morals and stuff.
So let's think in terms of geography here and what we know.
As far as borders?
Yeah, as far as borders and, more importantly, defense. So, for instance, the United States has an incredibly large border with Canada. And really, globally, an incredibly large border with Mexico, and then is bordered by 2 oceans. So how do you suppose a place like that could provide a common defense in an Ancap scenario?
So are we talking specific, what we would call the United States of America now, our landmass, or just one in general?
Yeah, ours, or even a let's say a globally larger one in general.
See,
superpower.
Right. The only reason I ask is because I think the United States has a very unique position in the world, from a defense standpoint. I think
it's been incredibly advantageous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's one of the major sources of our power, right? We've been removed from the wars of Europe, the wars in Asia. Yep. We have natural borders and natural defenses in both great oceans.
Over here in Iowa, we have the Mississippi River, which drops, I want to say 1,500 feet over the course of 2,000 miles or something like that. The Congo River over the course of 700 miles drops, a few thousand feet.
Right, yeah.
So and then that goes into another body of water that the United States, the Gulf of Mexico, that completely borders the United States, on one side. So very unique and advantageous.
Yeah, and the U.S. has very unique terrain, or at least in that unique within itself, right? It changes. You have the arid south, the southwest, and very mountainous northeast. You have actually even some of the mountainous parts of the south, and it's very easy country to defend in that, as an invading country. Not only do you need to logistically get yourself across the oceans, unless you're Canada or Mexico, you have to get yourself across the oceans and then also set up some kind of forward operating base with those crazy Appalachians and shit. But
the logistics of that, keeping it supplied too.
Right, but to generally answer the question about common defense that's kind of what we've been talking about in, community and these defense firms, state militia, or what we would consider a state militia, but maybe a private militia in this instance. But, let's just say you're living in, how would you common defense the city of New York, right? I think we can use this real example here. So we're living in the city of New York, and New York is broken up into 4 or 5 different sections, just say hypothetically, for Staten Island and Bronx and Queens and, give me another one, whatever, it doesn't matter. Brooklyn. Yeah, in Brooklyn, right? So, you have a major defense company that works in Manhattan and has a bunch of missile defense systems up on the great big skyscrapers, because that's a great place to put them, because the planes are going to fly that high and they're going to drop bombs and shoot missiles from up there. So why wouldn't you put missile defense systems on top of, the Empire State Building? Now,
somebody can profit off of that and employ people.
Correct. And then even the neighboring boroughs, they still benefit from that air cover because, there's a certain halo of defense that surrounds it. And I don't think that in the heat of the moment, right, as the missile's coming in, that defense agency is going to be like, oh, wait, we're actually running an analysis. We think it's going to land in Brooklyn, so we're not going to fire. Right? I don't think they would do that. And even if they had the ability, they would still have they could very well have families in Brooklyn or from the company that works there because they're going to live in the city or around the city because they got to travel to work. And not to mention, they don't want to have all of the city of Manhattan or the borough of Manhattan has every interest in keeping roadways through Brooklyn or Queens or wherever open because their citizens need to get in and out. So they would still
infrastructure.
They would still feel incentivized. Also, most likely, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but they would likely still feel incentivized to intercept those bombs, those missiles, and to defend that area. So there would be this kind of breaks into also where it's like, okay, what if you're poor? How do you defend yourself? But there would be some kind of halo of protection that being able to take advantage of, and for sure, right now, how do poor people get anything? Like there's companies that cater to them specifically,
right? We touched on that a lot on the last episode towards the end there. So
let's say even kind of to get out of the city, if you're living in Appalachia. Right, West Virginia, they're not. There's some wealthy people in West Virginia, but the majority of the state, is working poor.
Dirt poor.
Yeah. They're not gonna be able to afford some high tech defense company to come in there to protect them. But they have natural terrain and years of experience there. I think that there would be a freaking nightmare and guns. It would be an absolute nightmare to go in and meth, which they'll never get tired and they're never hungry. But but what I'm saying is that it would be an absolute nightmare for any kind of army going through there. I mean, it's like Taliban times 10.
I was just going to say, it is slightly reminiscent of stories of Afghanistan. You're
right.
You're talking about people that have been around there for. Really, thousands of years.
Even
it'd be no different. Yeah.
Even you go to Vietnam, right? I think even there would be instances probably where there would be support from outside to defend. Because, if let's just say, there's Canada is an up and coming national superpower, and America is now Ancapistan or whatever. It's broken into sections of communal entities or maybe a couple states here and there. Their neighbors like Mexico, even so the remnants of whatever the United States is, if there still is part of the country, has incentive so that to see an expanding Canada stopped. So why would they not also then say, hey, we're going to provide, some material aid to, these poor people in Wisconsin to resist the yoke of this foreign aggressor? I mean, that happened in Vietnam. I think it was a little different because it was communism versus capitalism, but
on more of a global type scale,
right? And it's happening in Ukraine right now, where the U.S. is intervening purportedly to defend democracy. There, we know that's not true, but But either way, either way, the outcome is still the same in that they are providing weapons and funding. That I assume at least a little bit of it is getting to the troops. I don't know how much of it, but still, what I'm saying is that if by chance this community is not able to provide its own security, or at least not able to source its own security, then it's not against. I guess it's not out of the realm of of possibilities that some kind of philanthropic giving or something like that, or some kind of not even that, even to self-interest giving from another country would help supplement that as well. But I think that it would be pretty obvious fairly quickly that any kind of massive land incursion into what was once the United States is a folly, just from the size.
Difficult, yeah.
Yeah, the size of the country and
a bunch of renegade rednecks.
Exactly. I was going to say the hardiness of the people. There's a lot of there's a culture. Even though we're filled with a bunch of losers nowadays, we still have a pretty big culture of just straight up gun loving, God fearing, or even non-God-fearing, just crazy people that love their guns and making bombs and stuff. And I think as soon as that stuff goes out,
they love their bonfire. They love the way they live, and they don't want
anybody the internet the internet exists, and so does the Anarchist Cookbook. So I mean,
it's been around for a while. So
yeah.
Well, that answer that's pretty good. It's
Absolutely.
More, so between the last episode and this, I think that answers that pretty decently. So moving on. One thing you'd said in there about like the roadways, they would, it'd behoove the other groups or whatever if they were more stronger to help keep the infrastructure open. So how would the society or societies take care of their community, like the roads and infrastructure, like logistics with, say, meat or food in general or goods? I mean,
yeah,
I would assume it would look. I would assume it would look a lot like Somaliland. Right, where the communities pay for their own schools and they maintain their own roadways and they help all that stuff out. They're not public or nationally recognized as even anything at all, but they're a pretty good example of, I guess, anarcho-capitalism. Really, if you look into it, I think.
Yeah, I think there could be done a lot of ways. I mean, I think obviously there would be some roads that would be privately owned and work much like. Something like, I don't know if you in Iowa, if you call them turnpikes, but like in Pennsylvania, we have tolled roads, and we have this interstate road that goes, across the state, like from east to west, and also north to south, called the Turnpike, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and it's just this big state-owned and operated interstate
monstrosity
roadway. Yeah. I mean, however, that being said, aside from the fact that they overcharge us for registration and then they charge the shit out of us for tolls, the road, the toll road is generally in great shape. I mean, aside from the fact they're always working on it, in the areas that are completed, it's a nice road to drive on.
Well, that's
right.
Good.
Yeah.
So there would be roads similar in that they would be owned by private individuals or companies. They might be tolled. They might be, hey, you got to pay for a sticker to put on your car, and to drive on it, which is like some kind of usage fee, yearly or monthly or whatever. Like, I'm sure there would be a smattering of it. I'm sure there also, I could see that they would be some kind of, what it's like some kind of, I don't want to say community, but some kind of trade group perhaps, where they say, okay, well, we're a bunch of private road owners. We're going to band together in a single entity, and this is the overall standard that we're going to apply to our roads. We're going to charge X amount of dollars per month to drive on them. However, the sticker will let you drive on all of these roads. And it could be also that communities would, within your HOA or whatever, you would pair together, like maybe even the city of New York, the city would exist. Like there would be some kind of board of directors, perhaps, of the major business owners within the city or major landowners, or some kind of spattering of community leaders or whatever that would then also sit on a committee together to kind of manage these roads. Or, I think that there's a million different ways to kind of think about how they do this. And I think Walter Block does the most, it probably has the most compelling argument about how privatized roads would work. The name of the book is escaping me, but he did write extensively about it. But, I think
he's wrote a lot about a lot of private lots of things, right? I mean,
yeah. His I think a lot of what his focus on scholarly work is okay, he knows we have the moral argument that anarchism in the end of the state is the correct path, like morally and justly, right?
Sure.
How would it work then? Like, how do I justify it to the people that say, oh, well, doesn't that just mean that we wouldn't be able to build roads, right? And as I had to throw this in here because I always think it's funny, but Eric July. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy. He's an anarchist, culture guy. He just launched a comic book company within the last couple of days. But he's often on the Blaze with Elijah. I forget his name. Elijah Schaefer. And he's got a podcast, and he always says fuck those hoe ass roads, man, because it's supposed to be a gotcha question for anarchists, and it's really we can't figure out how to pave horizontal surfaces to go from one place to another. Like come on, we fly planes and stuff. We got satellites up in the air. We can figure this one out.
Yeah.
But, and that's not to put that in question, TP, but I think there's just a lot of different ways that it could happen, and I think it would really just depend on the community and the culture within that geographical area we're talking about. But
no, you didn't put down the question. It was just a question. You know, I'm sure other people had that question, so that's why I asked it. So
I mean, I think a lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I think the income tax was instituted in 1919. Is that correct?
Earlier than that, 1913 or something like that.
For the income tax.
Yeah. So, but my point,
1913, 1916. Anyway, go ahead.
So my point is that New York had roads before that.
Yes.
Right before there was major taxation, and they were built not necessarily by like the government, but they were paved and they were created, and it's been done like that for years in America.
Some of the best
so
in the world.
And even
some
if
of the
you
best
look
in
down,
the world, right?
Yeah.
Right. And if you go down to Florida today and you look at Disney parks, right? Like Disney parks, technically those roads are state park. I didn't know this after. It wasn't until like him and DeSantis and Disney started getting in their shit. But like the roads on Disney property, they're technically state roads, but they were all paid for and paved by Disney and maintained. And if you've ever driven down, that roads are great.
Yeah,
they're beautiful roads.
Yeah.
They're smooth as shit.
Fantastic.
There's a lot of asphalt out there. There's a lot of places to go, easy turns. Everything makes sense.
Yep.
And that's complete. That's kind of a terrible company nowadays, but they did a great job. So
they did a great job of being totalitarians of their little part of Florida.
Yeah.
Right, and but what I would say is, you as a private owner, that's how you would treat your property too. You're the king of your. You guys are sitting out in your shed right now. I think that's on your land, right?
Magic Kingdom. Yeah, it's a shack.
There it is.
Yeah, we're on just a shack in the middle of nowhere.
Out in the
that's
corner.
Where we're at.
Yeah. Well, that's Teepee's castle, and he's the king.
That's right. Well, actually, this is Theo's castle. Mine's the outhouse next door.
Hey, you gotta take what you can get,
Yeah, hey man, I'm happy with what I can get. Right.
There you go.
4 walls and a roof. So, moving on. That was answered pretty good. So, what is an Ancap's thoughts on the Constitution and the American Revolution? Do you think it was a step in the right direction or another attempt at statism?
I think the Constitution is a failed document. I put almost zero stock in it other than just being fascinated by it. I think it's interesting. It's fun to, theorize around it, because I do, I love America. I'm American. I am through and through.
I love America too.
I like to talk about it. It's very interesting, right? Because it has such a huge impact on your life. At least it should. I think it's widely disregarded by who we would call our ruling class. I don't think it's
federal government.
Yeah, they've been wiping their snot with it for a long time.
While I don't put any stock in how it should limit my behavior, I also don't think that it's wrong to then judge that ruling class by the document for which they're supposed to rule you with, right? So the idea of the Constitution being this limiting factor on their power, it's totally within your right to judge them based upon that document while simultaneously thinking that it has zero power over you. Because I didn't sign it, right? And I didn't take an oath to it. I took an oath to it when I joined the Marine Corps.
You took an oath to defend it.
But I'm not in it anymore, so I don't give a shit about it now.
No, man. That's not what the Oath Keepers would tell you, brother.
I don't care what the Oath Keepers say. I'm not the Oath Keepers. I didn't sign an oath to them either.
Yeah, I didn't sign up for that either. Yeah, they've tried to get me, and I'm like, no thank you.
No offense to the Oath Keepers reading this.
Yeah, no offense to you guys. I think they do a lot of good things, a lot of good communication, helping a lot of guys, but
got a bad rap
for me.
But what is it like that Lysander Spooner says? He says the Constitution either basically I can't remember it right off the top of my head, but basically what we're saying is that it either like created the government that we have today, or it failed to stop it from becoming what it is today. And either way, it's not fit to exist, is what he says. It's basically saying
point.
Okay.
Yeah, basically what he says is, okay, well, the Constitution either authorizes this government we have, or it failed to stop it.
Who was that again?
Lysander Spooner.
Oh, yeah, okay. yeah. 19th century.
He's anarchist, really interesting guy. not to get off on a tangent, but he created he's the reason why there's a monopoly on mail for the USPS, because he created a competing service that was better and cost less. So the government gave the U.S. Postal Service a monopoly because of that. But then I think to your other point, or at least your first question rather about the revolution, is I have a great admiration for the colonists back then. I think they did was just insane.
Strong people, awesome. Strong people.
Yeah, I think I kind of take. I think I take like Murray Rothbard's kind of view of it, where he has admiration for the colonists, for the independence fighters, but at the same time he despises people like Washington and a lot of the other founding fathers, because they essentially took a libertarian revolution and turned it into an oligarchic revolution, just a homegrown one. I think, I don't know if you've. So
and then we made them gods.
We did, and we pray to them essentially with all of our monuments and all of our holidays.
Interesting thought. Yeah,
I mean, it's not to say that they weren't interesting men. They certainly were. I mean, I admire to a certain degree. I admire like Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, that's weird. I just took a drink at Jefferson,
and some other ones, because I think like at his heart, his political philosophy, at least Jefferson's, is very it's very libertarian. And I would say if I had to classify myself as how I look at the Constitution, I would say I'm way more of a Jeffersonian than a Hamiltonian.
Likewise.
But
likewise. Yeah, as far as money too, the theory of money in particular for me.
Right, and Hamilton's insistent on a central bank, which I think is one of the worst things ever, as it funds the empire.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think back to the colonists themselves. I think it's a point that people often forget. We think about the start of revolution in 1776 when, the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence, which, to give them credit, that's probably the greatest political document ever written, at least in my mind. I think that is about as libertarian as anything that's ever been written that's a political document. I think up until that point, I guess maybe I'd say the Magna Carta, but This is like, no shit, no, we're declaring our rights, which is it's a natural rights document, which of course we talked about that earlier. And, I believe
all men created equal.
Main premises of Magna Carta were that if essentially, I guess to say it in layman's terms, if the king acted out, they could take some land or something like that, right?
Right. But yeah, so I think, but what people forget is that, the revolution started in 1775. I think, and it started in the Northeast with those crazy Massachusetts people.
Ton Tavern, Boyle.
And they're going up there and, fighting the British over their guns. I mean, it started as essentially, a gun confiscation fight where the British sent regulars across the river from Boston to go and seize the armory up in Lexington, I think, in Concord.
Yep.
And the colonists responded, and a couple of them got shot. But then that's where the conversation in school stops. Is that two colonists got shot in the first exchange of gunfire? But then what happened after that was these militiamen harassed the British all the way back to Boston and beat the shit out of them. They had they had women and children running ammo to the militia people. It's like the most badass thing you ever heard. A bunch of freaking farmers run around with rifles, and they're just hitting them and running away, hitting them and running away. And the British had no idea what to do. They were so effective that they forced them back into Boston and put them under siege for the next year or so.
Well, they still had a bunch of veterans from the War of 1812 there that were working with the Native Americans and learning all those guerrilla warfare tactics. That's how they learned how to do all that.
You're thinking the French and Indian War.
I'm sorry, the French and Indian War. Yeah, 1812 came later. I'll edit that out.
Yeah, we had.
Duh. Seeing as how we're talking about 1775 right now.
Yeah, we literally had I think if you examine records and obviously they're not 100% accurate because they were talking how many years ago, but from a kill perspective, the American colonists were way more accurate than the Redcoats ever were. And oh my god,
probably from living on the frontier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was also technique. They were taught to shoot differently. So they were hunters, so they shot with their eyes open. The British were taught to close their eyes when they fired to keep the gunpowder from going in their eyes.
Oh yeah.
When the flintlock would ignite, it would send smoke in your eyes and it would blind you temporarily.
The old smoke in the eye trick.
So the British were taught to close their eyes and turn their head. So they were just, for them, it was all volume of fire, whereas the colonists were accurate fire. And that's why guerrilla tactics were so successful during the, popularized by the Patriot, of course, but best used by like people like the Vermont militia, which is the Green Mountain Boys and a bunch of other, West Pennsylvania and Kentucky militiamen. They're some of the best shooters of all time.
Kentucky.
What was the wilderness like then?
Oh my God! Tough life it had to be, right?
Oh yeah, that had been rough.
But yeah,
Tough
but
people.
I think I have great admiration for those maniacs, those savages.
Likewise.
But I would say when I look back on the revolution, it's kind of, I look back a little melancholy in that, like, it started as this great libertarian revolution where, like, this taxation against representation is such a boring line. If it really what the war was about was just local self-government and secession and freedom, right? It wasn't about giving your power away to some central authority or something, which this ended up turning into. But I would say, I think the revolution was a great libertarian war. It's probably the only one in American history that I think they started with total moral, high ground, or at least like impetus to do it.
Yeah. Well, and if I put my tinfoil hat on real quick, maybe it got hijacked by the Rothschilds right at the end there.
Oh.
Well, I think it just got hijacked from people like Washington. Washington was the largest landowner in the country, and there's a lot of thought, at least judging by his writing and everything, is he, right up until almost the war started, he was trying to get a commission in the Royal Army. The thing is, though, is that the British didn't give commissions to like non-British born officers. Like, so he could be an officer in the militia in the Army of Virginia or whatever. Like, so he was an obviously he was a general.
He was also, before that, he was an officer in the British military. Remember?
But he couldn't get like. So I don't know if there was some kind of
Virginia organization though.
Yes,
but
he wasn't.
Here's the interesting thing with that. In order, and I learned this at the lodge when I was a Freemason. In order to become a officer or go through the ranks as an officer in the British military at that time of the British Empire, you had to be a Freemason.
Ooh.
And we know how much of a big role the Freemasons played in helping create the country, right?
Well, I think you had to be an officer of the British regulars. You had to be born in England. Washington couldn't be a general in.
No, he would never be able to be. You're right. You're absolutely correct with that. And he couldn't get commission, but he's still. I'm just saying he was still in that club, and it's just
right. Well, he was in a club. He wasn't in the club. That's his problem. And that's a theory that.
Wasn't it Buckingham Palace?
It wasn't the right club, chap.
He wasn't a real gentleman. Yeah, he wasn't a good chap.
In fact, they would think he was just some frickin' redneck is what
most
they would think.
That's what they looked at colonists as rednecks back then, which is funny that like from a literacy standpoint, the colonists were the most literate country in the world, but at the time.
Nothing important happened then.
Hey, and no state-run education there either. So, but anyway.
Oh wow, interesting point.
Yeah,
driving it home.
Look at that.
Yes, I'm doing my best. But
you're doing great.
But yeah, I think like what ended up happening with from my perspective at least, and from Rothbard's, and I would suggest also there's this guy named Prophecy J. Teepee. I'm pretty sure I've told you about this guy before, but he has a great Revolutionary War series on the Dangerous History podcast. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend it.
Dangerous History podcast. No affiliation.
None.
No affiliation.
But maybe we can get him on the show. Have a conversation with him.
That would be very.
He's a cool guy, but he talks about that, how it was, the revolution was hijacked by people like Washington and Adams and everything that
Jefferson.
And Jefferson to an extent. But they started off very revolutionary in their thinking of independence, but then when it came to, actually governing and kind of writing the theory around how the U.S. system would work, they became very unrevolutionary. And that's kind of where...
And it's super weird that we, like I said, that we...
Is it true that Jefferson was in Paris?
Stealing...
during the Constitution writing? Yeah, he wasn't in the country at the time.
What about the war?
During the war? That's a good question.
Was that when he went and stole the rice from Spain?
He might have been there trying to. He might have been the ambassador trying to secure France or French support for the war, perhaps.
Oh, okay. But
I don't know. I'm not sure. But I knew he wasn't there when the Constitution was drafted. But to kind of, I guess, bring it home is that if I could choose, I think the Articles of Confederation were far superior than the Constitution ever was. I mean, I think the Articles of Confederation essentially did, in practice, what the Constitution was meant to do in theory, if that makes sense, right? Like it essentially didn't allow any chance of any kind of federal expansion, which that's purportedly what the Constitution was meant to do.
Yes.
And it maintained this agreement between the states not to hinder interstate commerce in any way, shape, or form, and to try to encourage it, right? So to kind of smooth over the fact that you have these 13 separate states. However, you don't want to have like a visa system to get in and out of them as you're trying to run goods from, Pennsylvania to New Jersey. So it was doing everything that the Constitution was supposed to. The thing it wasn't doing was taxing funds to pay for the war that they just fought. But I would contend the problem is if they would have maintained state militias like the war started with, rather than trying to raise this huge and vastly unsuccessful regular Continental Army, then you wouldn't have that problem in the first place.
Yeah, that answers that pretty good. I'm
sure I'm going to get a lot of nice comments for the fact that I just said the Continental Army was unsuccessful.
I'm sure going to get more comments about some other stuff you said, but who cares?
Yeah.
As long as people are having a conversation, that's all we're happy about. So you would briefly touched on this a little bit when you were answering the last question, but you talked about centralized banking. And obviously, we've all expressed how we feel about centralized banks and how, they're the devil, right? But how would economics work without a centralized currency? Which I'm pretty sure I know how you're going to answer this, but I do want to know what your answer would be.
Well, hold on. Let's explain for our listeners that may not know exactly how a central bank works real quick. Choun, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, it's pretty simple. I'll try to explain it real quick, just in layman's terms.
In layman's,
which is all I know
terms.
All it is it's a private entity that when Congress needs money, Congress, drafts a bill, they pass it or don't pass it, but the ones that pass require money to fund. So there's a central bank to issue a line of credit to Congress on behalf of the United States, the people of the United States, and they loan it to them at interest.
With interest, yes.
Correct?
Let me break it down even more to a layman's term. Let's say in the scenario, I own the only apple tree in the world, or only apple orchard in the world, okay? You want some apples. I said, all right, well, how about we do this? I'll loan you some apples, but for every one apple that I loan you, you owe me 2 back. But you can't take the seeds from that apple to plant other trees, and you can't give me some artificial homemade bullcrap that's not an apple. So good luck owing me. And the government's like, that's a great deal. Anybody else would be like, that's a terrible idea because now I'm essentially indebted to you forever. There's no way for me to ever repay you back.
Debt slave.
Yes. Got anything to add to that, Choun?
Well, yeah, I would say how the Federal Reserve works, like to kind of bring it home to the United States, is to create money. They don't just necessarily just print it, right? Like they can just do that, but to have it enter the market, they purchase securities on the open market. The open market being obviously the bond market or stock market or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And they add the corresponding funds that they just printed or they use the computer to make into the bank reserves of the commercial banks from which they bought those securities, bonds, or whatever from.
What they buy?
So then the banks they buy them on the open market. They buy it with the money that they're creating. But they have to inject.
Yes.
They have
that they created themselves. Sounds like the greatest scam in the world.
Circular reasoning.
Well, right. What I'm saying is they have to. I'm trying to say, how does it get into the marketplace? They don't just print the money and then fly a helicopter over a bank, just throw it at them. Like
they do that in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but like from an accounting point of view, there has to be another side of this equation. Like if you're doing any kind of accounting work, there's two sides to every transaction.
But in reality, they're just numbers and paper, and it's all
correct. And it's all based on something.
The belief that it has value because nothing's backed by gold. Well, the ruble's
well, it depends on who you ask. Like some Keynesians would say that the value of the dollar is derived from the ability of the U.S. government to tax and to demand payment within those notes, and that's where
Maynard Keynes.
Right, and that's where the value of the dollar is derived. But that doesn't make sense either, because then you're saying, well, I'm just printing the money, I'm giving it to you, then I'm demanding it back from you.
Right.
How does that create any value? It's just
exactly.
It's made up, which it is. Like that's always my, that's always my kind of go-to is to say, well, that doesn't make sense, because if I just take this piece of paper and I write a 5 on it and I give it to you and I say, to pay me back for my services, now you have to give me that piece of paper, and now that gives that piece of paper a value of 5.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, right? So it's like
that's
that.
What it is, though.
But
But with the other person, when you hand that piece of paper to the other person, they have to have the understanding of, yes, this is valuable to me. This is worth 5 Choun coin.
I mean, I think it does make sense to think, I guess, now that we are not coupled to a precious metal or some kind of durable good or something, that the fact that everybody in the world, at the moment at least, recognizes the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency.
Right.
That in and of itself does create some kind of value in that dollar, because as a medium of exchange, you can exchange that dollar anywhere very easily, because anybody would just accept the dollar bill.
Right.
Yeah,
you don't have to convert
the
it.
world reserve currency and also the petrodollar.
Well, we talked about in the first episode.
Right.
Yeah. 500-pound bombs help out as well.
Yeah,
for sure. Having
they're very persuasive.
The fact that the U.S. Navy is the naval force that protects the trade routes, and we can just kill anybody on the face of the earth that we want to.
You mean 12 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers?
Yeah,
they project a lot of power.
Yep,
a little bit. I'd say
some people view it as threatening.
They're a force multiplier for sure.
I want to tie it back in, if I could, with...
Well, yeah, we didn't even have him answer the original question, but go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, in the 19th century, it was essentially like gold or silver is accepted everywhere, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then also what was the paper that was traded mostly were certificates that were essentially redeemable in that gold or silver issued by different banks. And... essentially, people were responsible for themselves to make sure that they're not just depositing some stuff or getting some notes from some sketchy outfit.
Some bank that they've never heard of before, right? Which would be kind of a sketch deal. I would imagine, though, in an anarchist capitalist society, currency would be just going back to that same thing probably. I mean, gold and silver, platinum... actual valuable metals, that's never going to lose its valueness to man.
Anything of value, essentially.
Gems, right?
Yeah, could be.
Precious metals. Anything of value. Barter systems would come in again. So, like, once again, that's how Somaliland operates. So you don't have money, but hey, I got this.
What is Somaliland?
You never heard of Somaliland?
No.
I plan on doing a show on it. So, since after Somalia had, Black Hawk Down and all that stuff, we pulled out. They had that. The dictator got assassinated by his own royal guard, and then Somalia split up again. And so far, the northern part of Somalia, right next to Ethiopia, has done a pretty good job of maintaining its own individual sovereignty away from
a state of sorts.
Yes, and there are kind of multiple states. There's still a lot of clans, tribalism.
Warlords out and stuff, or what?
Yeah, and they actually, like I said, so there's parts of it that are thriving very well. Like I said, it's not internationally recognized as a country or anything, so I don't know how they... I have to do more research into it, so I'm not sure how imports and stuff...
Well, that's probably the first
work.
reason they don't like it, is because it's people voluntarily coming together without...
they don't... They totally kicked out central banks and want nothing to do with it.
Oh.
Yeah, and then like I said...
Because they destroy?
Well...
They do.
They must have... Somebody there learned something. But anyway, like I said, I've been doing more research on it just because we're working on that show about putting together what happened, why we were ever in Somalia, why we tried to assassinate the president during a humanitarian mission.
Because that was the most humane thing to do. Why else?
Duh, we're saving the world.
America, fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah!
Or why we're still there.
Yeah, we still have troops there?
No.
We're still bombing them, yeah. So I was going to ask you because I know that, the refrain, well, why don't you move to Somalia is typically an anti-anarchist thing that I get, right? Like, because Somalia sucks. Nobody wants to live there. Why the hell would you want to live there over America? So then obviously anarchism's dumb, right? Because
that's
what they say. There's a very weak
central government there.
Yeah. So that's what they'll say. And I'm like, okay, but, first of all, it doesn't make any sense for you to even ask that because the country of Somalia never had the living standard of the United States or anybody close to the United States has.
Absolutely.
But that being said, as soon as the government fell and the turmoil started to calm down, living standards in Somalia raced faster than it ever has in its history.
Yes.
Since they started tracking those kind of things once the government went away. So what I was going to ask you, Teepee, is when you brought up northern Somalia and that they were still kind of independent in a way.
Yep.
It's like I didn't know that. I thought that they were kind of brought back under the umbrella of what we would call a state.
Yeah, no, they call
And I was going to ask then.
Go ahead.
Then I was going to ask is where is the U.S. then operating? Because I know they're still bombing Somalia.
Then they have
regularly.
It's probably in the Republic of Somalia in the southern section.
Oh, okay.
Without knowing,
and
right?
Probably even into parts of Ethiopia, because I think there's parts of Ethiopia that are still trying. Like there's tribal disputes there on that border between Somaliland and Ethiopia. So I think there's still stuff clashes there every once in a while. But I mean, they do a good job of protecting their own borders.
Speculation disclaimer.
What?
I just.
Oh.
I mean, as far as where they're bombing,
we don't. I have no idea where they're bombing, so I'd have to look into that. But we'll do some more research on it. You want to hear more about it? Let us know. We'll know. We'll get to it. But anyway, well, we got anything else? You want to hit on anything else about the?
What on money?
Yeah.
I think it would just. I mean, it would be like any other product. I mean, I think money in and of itself often is just thought, just as, it just kind of like in a very like just a store of value. But I mean, it's still like, in an anarchist society, obviously there might still be U.S. dollars because who knows if any part, if this thing starts breaking up.
Yeah, somebody might.
And then people might still hold it. Some people might still take trade in rubles or pounds or whatever, right? Francs. It could be anything. I think in an anarchist society there would be competing, currencies, and I think it would be incumbent, or at least it would be beneficial for businesses to set themselves up to be able to accept different modes of currency, because obviously they want to be able to expand their business to as many people as possible.
So I'm sure they're doing that now with cryptocurrency.
Exactly, and even you go to England right now, you can I can't confirm this 100%, but it only makes sense to me that you go to England, you could pay for things in dollar bills.
Yes.
So there's no reason and a lot of that has to do with just how the universality of the U.S. dollar bill. But that being said, there's no reason to think that if you live in Ancapistan and we have Ancapistan dollars, and they're backed by a certain store of gold within my Ancapistan community, that I can't go somewhere else and be like, here is these Ancapistan dollars, like you can turn these into this bank and you can get gold from me, from that bank, right? And there are actually even online gold companies right now that give you a debit card, right? So basically what you do is you pay a certain amount of dollars and you get a store of gold within a bank or two. Like I think that they centralize their gold deposits in like one or two different banks, and they give you a debit card, and you can pay in U.S. dollars against the gold that you have in this bank. Right?
Yeah.
So that could be a very simple way to get away around it too. Whereas, hey, I have this, I have $1,000 worth of gold or 1,000 something. It may be if I'm in Russia, it's 7,000 rubles worth of gold, or if I'm in England, it's 1,500 pounds worth of gold, or whatever it is.
Right.
But I have a certain amount of ounces of gold in this in this bank, and I go somewhere else, and I'm like, I have this many ounces of gold. If you take this card, then I can buy this, this soda from you, for what we would call today $2, but you would take X amount of ounces out of the bank, or at least now you would own X amount of ounces in gold, in principle, because now I've transferred it to you. Now, there'd be a certain amount of obviously that seems kind of unwieldy when I say it, but we're thinking in terms of how our financial system works today, and it wouldn't necessarily work exactly that way.
That was like one of the questions I was about to ask. Is like, would an Ancap bank loan your gold out to make money off of it, like the banks do nowadays?
Probably. I mean, I think they have. I think that the reserves that they would have to hold would certainly. I think that the expectations of reserves would be much higher. Like they would be forced to be able to produce like higher amounts of cash on demand or gold on demand than perhaps banks do now. I think the reserve limit's only like 5 or 10% right now, which is incredibly low. Like this whole fractional reserve banking. But,
dude, it's backed by the FDIC.
Yeah.
You're covered.
But I think even there. I saw this yesterday, and to be honest, I don't know a lot about it, but I think I don't know if you're familiar with who Peter Schiff is.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we talked about him.
Been calling it for decades.
Yeah. So I think he operates a bank or something in Puerto Rico, and he has to have a certain amount of reserves on hand, which is much higher than a normal U.S. bank. Huh. So I don't really know, but the point being there, of course, is that he's expected to maintain much higher amounts of cash in reserve, and he still was able to loan out money anyway. It might not be at such great amounts, but still, at the same time, it's like, the way that interest rates are supposed to work, where it's kind of pricing money out for you, right? There would be. Go ahead.
My father, interest rates. He paid something in excess of 20% in the 70s.
For his house.
The first house that he bought. And honestly, if times are bad, that's not that out of a line interest rate. It's not that crazy of an interest rate if times are bad.
Well,
right. And I suggest as a topic for you guys, for your listeners, is to kind of talk about interest rates and how money is supposed to work, because I think it's something that not a lot of people understand, and admittedly, it's something that I'm not an expert on. Like, I think I generally understand why the Fed is bad and what it does and why it's bad. Like, it's easy to say the Fed's bad because it funds all the terrible things our government does, but it's also bad because it distorts and destroys our economy.
Right. And hold on, let's name it. It's actually companies, right?
Yeah, it's not part of the federal government.
It's J.P. Morgan, Citibank, and Goldman, and these.
Goldman Sachs.
These other.
But in this instance, it's Powell and Yellen was one of the Fed chairs, and Greenspan and Bernanke and all these ghouls that
Helicopter Ben.
That's a good name for him. Ghouls.
These ghouls that purport to put their thumb on the scale and improve the economy, when in fact all they're doing is enriching their friends and themselves.
And I think
at the banks.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it is set up to be it's such a complicated. It's not easy to understand, is on purpose, so that the common folk like us either get disinterested, and we just it's too complicated. We don't want to understand this, and we don't know how bad we're getting screwed. Really. Well,
I'll quibble with you for just a small one there. Is that I think that financial markets are inherently complex. I think we're dealing with a lot of inputs, at least in the economy today. But
does it need to be that way, though?
Mises would say individual human action, the science of individual human action.
Right. But there's a lot of competing interests and a lot of interlocked markets across the globe. I think it's going to be complex. I think the way the Federal Reserve works is purposely obfuscated and put behind a screen so that the common man doesn't understand it or doesn't think about it.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. This system has been built over decades. But
what I'm saying, though,
years
what I'm saying is that it's going to be complex no matter what. I think the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve System, the central banking system, adds an extra layer of complexity that distorts the market in a detrimental way. So I agree that the Federal Reserve System, the central bank system in the United States, is complicated, and it seems to be for a reason, and it probably is for a reason. But all I'm saying is that the markets would still be complicated and would still involve, and you would still need to be specialized in a way where not everybody's going to understand it, but at least, I think it's something that everybody should have a basic understanding on, and that's an education standpoint.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to say and add on here is that, you can go around the world and use dollars in so many places. For instance, I've traveled for pleasure to Central America, and you can just use your dollars everywhere. They take dollars. They have their own currency as well, but they take dollars. And particularly in Central America, there are some reasons, that is in tying into, the financial agreements of, Bretton Woods and all that, and the dollar is the reserve currency, but and they're not the most innocent reasons.
Does it have anything to do with the 80s?
As far as what?
The people that were making lots of U.S. dollars down there.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm just saying, it is kind of blood money. There's a reason. There is a reason that when you go to these other countries, in Central America and whatnot, they're not really interested in you. They do just kind of want your
money. Yeah,
and I don't blame them. I mean,
yeah.
I don't like outsiders coming where I live either.
Well, it's like those resorts in Mexico and stuff. You go to those all-paid resorts. The people are great. They're paid to be great.
Absolutely.
I mean, a lot of the people are just really good people because the workers, those are good jobs for them in Mexico because the company pays for their uniforms. They usually have a room downstairs where they get fed by the hotel and stuff. Yeah, and everything. They get taken care of. So they are happy to be there, and they like keeping their jobs. But anyway, I digress. So, all right. Well, yeah, that covered that quite a bit. So, I think that pretty much wraps us up. Hey, do you have any what books would you recommend for the listeners?
I'm glad that you said that. I was going to mention a couple and ask if
I know we mentioned on the first. Read them. I know we mentioned on the first episode on money and banking.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good. That I think that's a little bit more labor intensive. I think. So I think a lot of times to be honest, I quite often I find reading about money very boring. As much as I like money, but reading about it can be very dry. And there are Murray Rothbard's treatment on it is pretty intensive. There are some other ones out there. I'd have to send you. Maybe I can send you a note.
Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt.
That's one of the best to start with. Absolutely one of the best books. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good.
But from an anarchist perspective, I would suggest starting with the Anarchist Handbook. Michael Malice put it together over the last year or so, and it's essentially it's a collection of
he was talking about
just a spattering of anarchists, from all sides. So you got to understand, I'm calling myself an anarcho-capitalist. There are a lot of anarchists out there that would say I'm not an anarchist because capitalism is inherently un-anarchistic because it's based on hierarchies, and hierarchies are then therefore
everything is based on hierarchies.
Yeah,
right.
That's tribalism. That's never going to go away.
That's our critique of what we would consider leftist anarchists or anarcho-communists. But
it's human nature.
But in here he has people like Bakunin and Berkman and David Friedman, Emmett Goldman, Murray Rothbard, of course. Lysander Spooner, there's a bunch of. It's a great place to be there. I mean, I think you get a spattering of what would be considered right-wing anarchists, I guess what I would be considered anarcho-capitalist, and then also Emmett Goldman, who emigrated from the Soviet Union into the United States and was summarily kicked out of the country and sent back to the Soviet Union. And
really?
And because she was she was a fan of she was a Marxist. She believed in communism, but she didn't believe in the state.
She didn't believe in the state.
Right, which communists
neither do
inherently, if they believe in their own theory, then they are anti-state. But it's just funny how it never quite gets there. But so when when she went back to the Soviets, she was just horrified by what was going on there with Lenin and Stalin and everything. And
oh man,
I think
she's
that's
an interesting
the story.
read too.
It always turned out that way. It wasn't the way they wanted it.
Yeah. Weird
exactly.
how these things always happen.
There's always somebody that wants power, and they're willing to do nasty, horrible things for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the revolution is the next generation's problem, not right now. I mean, we now they have to centralize power to destroy centralized power or something like that. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
Their commies are dumb.
Oh. Yeah.
But yeah, so Anarchist Handbook's a good place for anarchism, and at least kind of get you to wet your palate there, because you get them from all over the spectrum. Economics in One Lesson, excellent book. Highly recommend it for anybody that's interested in economics. Now, of course, if I didn't mention Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, then I would be. I'd have to forfeit my card here. But
The Road to Serfdom by Hayek.
There you go.
F.A.
But that
Hayek.
being said, Human Action is a huge book. And it's a hard read.
Is it? Okay.
So I suggest then is Choice by Robert P. Murphy.
Okay.
Is essentially he takes that, puts some modern spin on it, and it's a little easier to read. Anything by Robert, his book in Chaos Theory is also good. Kind of touches on a lot of things. We're talking about a non-state legal framework and those kind of things.
I got one here. Teepee, if you have not read this, you need to read this. Choun, thinking that you have probably read this. Let's see. The Law by Friedrich Hayek or Friedrich Bastiat.
Yes.
Yes. It's a very short read. Have you read it, TV?
No, I have not.
It's a very short read.
Okay.
It's in early English, but I don't know. Choun, what do you think? I think it's to me, it's a staple. It's a must read.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. You can get them in like little pocket versions of them too.
Yeah, very short, but everything that you read in that, I mean, I didn't really find anything that didn't reason true. Reason true.
Cool. All right. Well, I will definitely check it out. There's a few books here I'm gonna have to check out. So,
and I guess one more, since we talked about the revolution. But Murray Rothbard, like I said, I had mentioned that he wrote a book about it, For a New Liberty.
I believe you mentioned that in the last episode too.
Yeah, that one is more or less like laying out a libertarian society and answering a bunch of questions about it.
Okay.
So that's a good one. And then Conceived in Liberty is his book about the revolution. And it's a lot of many volume work, phenomenal read, a lot of, like I said, I had mentioned that one podcast about it, and he pulls a lot of his material from
The Dangerous History.
Right. So he pulled a lot of his material from, the great Murray Rothbard in that book. So highly suggested if you're interested in it.
Choun, did you read Rothbard's Betrayal of the American Right?
No, I started reading The New Right by Michael Malice, and he references it a bunch in there. So,
excellent.
But yeah,
excellent book. I have read it. Excellent book.
A lot of he wrote a bunch of articles along, like not necessarily along with the book, but after his failed paleo strategy, with trying to appeal to the redneck of the time, I guess in the early '90s, and how was it Buckley or that betrayed him, or like who am I thinking of? Am I mixing him up with
William H. Buckley?
Yeah.
I think he was one of the initial neoconservatives.
Yeah, so
right?
essentially,
interesting. He worked for the CIA too.
Yeah, right. So I think the idea here was that Rothbard would champion the cultural right, where if they also then kind of looked at economics the way that he did, from a libertarian perspective, and to try to shrink the state, and then they just stab them in the back in the end.
Absolutely, and go ahead, sorry.
Which in libertarian circles, that is the great criticism from a lot of libertarians of Murray Rothbard, is his embracing the I guess the paleos, the hard writers, right? But they failed to remember that in the 60s and 70s he courted the leftists, the anti-war leftists, and they stabbed him in the back too. So it's just being a libertarian and anarchist is just being fucked by everybody all the time. So just the way it goes.
Yeah, we're used to it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, I think this was very, very educational, very informative.
Productive conversation.
Yeah. So, Choun, once again, we really appreciate you coming on. I think we will have to have you on some more in the future about some other stuff. Who knows? But, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Iowa Talk Guys.
For now.
Follow us on Spotify, Audible, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Podbean. And then also, if you guys want to drop us a line, you can hit up Theo and I. I'm Teepee at Iowatalkguys.com.
And I'm Theo at Iowatalkguys.com.
Yep. Well, thanks again, Choun.
Thanks, Choun.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
All right, man. Signing off.